What's up, everyone? Today we're talking about what it means to train like an athlete and 3 foundational principles I use. Now, before we go any further and talk about those principles, let's just really quickly define what most people think athleticism actually is, right? We're trained to be an athlete, we're trained to be more athletic. So what the heck is that? Well, I think more times than not, people think it is the expression of power, so speed, so how fast we're moving, as well as the force we're producing, being performed on a field or court sport. So things like running, jumping, sprinting, track and field, football, basketball, so on. Not necessarily powerlifting or weightlifting. While that is a very, that takes a lot of athletic abilities, that's not what most people think of when we think about athleticism. I think they're talking about more of these field and court sports. So when we're talking about athleticism going forward, that's what I'm kind of referring to. If you want to talk about being an athlete in regards to powerlifting or weightlifting, that's a different topic, and that's not one I'm going to be diving into. So let's go into it. Principle number 1 is max strength training. Now, there's a difference between max strength training and training to get stronger, right? Training to get stronger means your entire goal is to get stronger. So your entire training is geared towards getting as strong as humanly possible. Someone like a power lifter would have a program related to this. But maximal strength training is just a way to describe using relatively heavy weights, maybe 80 to, I guess in theory, 100% of your 1RM, and doing them for maybe not as many reps as a bodybuilder would do, something like 60 or 70% of your 1RM, but doing them for high quality, high intent reps, trying to move the bar with good pace, well, obviously as fast as it possibly can with a heavy weight, which isn't very fast at all, I get it. But the point of it is that heavy weight forces the body to work really hard, and it improves what we call central drive and general output. Now, it's kind of a very vague, nebulous term, but in concept, volitional drive, so how much voluntary effort you can produce, in theory, can be trained. And it's trained against moving heavy weights and also really light weights fast. But when we have a really heavy weight, there's something about it that evokes a response that is almost, you have to lift it as hard as you can, right? Because no one gets to lift a heavy weights fast. They lift it as fast as they can, and it just happens to move slowly. It also has a lot of benefit for improving maximal strength, right? It's not designed and geared, your entire program is not about improving maximal strength, but training with those heavier weights has the potential to improve the maximal force output of your muscles. So maximal strength training, synonymous with maximal force output. The second concept is power training, or I think more times than not, an easier way to think about it is rate of force development. Keyword being rate, so speed. How fast are we moving something? Now, like I mentioned, maximal strength training does force you to lift a really heavy weight, and when you lift a really heavy weight, you're moving as fast as you can. So yes, maximal strength training, it's been shown in research too, can improve rate of force development. However, because the weight is just really heavy, you can't do it multiple times, right? It's not like I can do 90% of my 1RM for 5 sets of 4 reps. That's not going to happen. But I can move a lighter weight for 5 sets of 4 reps. And exposing myself to that lighter weight and trying to move it fast is working on my ability, my rate of force development, producing force against a lighter weight, moving it fast. On top of that, it also trains my ability to continue to produce force against increasing velocities. So when that weight is light, we move it fast. If we want to keep moving a light weight fast, we have to produce more force while the bar is moving fast. So it's forcing our ability to produce force against higher velocities. Number 3 is the concept I think most people miss out on, and that's contraction dynamics. So a way you can think about contraction dynamics is think about almost like a symphony or an orchestra. Your muscles have to work in harmony and synchrony when you run, jump, and cut. Now, unlike lifting a really heavy weight, where you lift it one time, those muscles all work together and they try and lift the weight, that's great, but we're not changing our limb position, we're not in the air, we're not having movement. We're just moving the weight essentially in one plane. Now, when I talk about contraction dynamics, it's very much synonymous with plyometrics. Plyometrics where we run, jump, and cut, but of different planes of motion, different speeds. Some of them are trying to get fast off the ground, some of them are trying to get high off the ground, and then some of them really intense where we're trying really hard, and some of them light and rhythmic. Now, contraction dynamics actually has a whole bunch of subcategories under it because it's plyometrics and all things kind of movement related. But when I think about train like an athlete, we really need to emphasize that area. The reason being is that if you think about it, as I like scratch my head here because this thing's making me itch. If you think about it, more times than not in lifting, most people go to the gym and they train heavy. They train, fast. They, at least for the most part, sometimes they don't, but they at least train heavy and they get stronger, and sometimes they do power work. But rarely do you see anyone doing change of direction movements, running, jumping, cutting, and they rarely progress it. How do you expect you develop these muscular qualities? You get strong quads, you get strong glutes, but you've never dealt with an impact, changing directions, your ankles hitting the ground, moving, and the dynamics, the rate of loading, that's the speed of loading, the speed of the stretch, and so on the muscle tissues itself. And so when you think about training like an athlete, I think people get the first two, but the last one people really don't do. And irony, that the last one is probably the most important one. If we're going to want to be athletic and express our power and movement on the court, we have to move and organize our movement pattern. So I think that area of contraction dynamics, it's a fancy word of saying moving in multiple planes in multiple ways, can be really, really beneficial. Doing things, an easy example would be a light warm-up where we skip and bounce side to side, all the way up to intense hurdle hops. Right? That's all under the umbrella of movement, but so often we don't see that. More people are inclined to try and lift a new PR than they are to sprint. Why? Well, because I don't know why. Maybe it's just common practice, but if we want to be able to sprint, we have to build a tissue capacity to sprint. And just like lifting a heavy weight, you're not just going to be a first-time weight room goer and go and try and max out all the time. And just like sprinting, you haven't sprinted in a while, don't just try and sprint right away. Build into it. Treat it with progression and regression. So I hope that makes sense. I'll leave it there because I could rant about this probably for another 20 minutes, especially when it comes to how we organize these these contraction dynamic, these plyometric-like movements in our training. But the point is, those three principles all kind of work together with I would say that the contraction dynamics kind of being the ultimate connection piece between the field work and what you do in the weight room. You could do what you do in the weight room over and over again, but you're really leaving it up to chance whether or not you're even going to translate it to the field, especially if you're not doing anything movement related. If you're not running, jumping, sprinting, changing directions of any regressed or progressed version of that, then if you're just lifting heavy weights, it'd be the equivalent to like all you do is sprint, right? You just sprint, and you're like, I am now ready to do a PR in squatting, and you haven't squatted in 6 months. Flip that around. People do it all the time. They'll squat, they'll lift, they'll squat, they'll lift, and they'll go play a recreational basketball game where they gotta sprint up and down the court, but they haven't sprinted or moved in 3 months. It's kind of crazy, and you wonder why people lose a step or they have aches and pains they're not used to. Well, you're not even used to moving in the first place. In the same way, I'd be really sore if I sprinted for 6 months straight and then went to go do a PR in the weight room. So I'll leave it there right now as I'm wound up. I had a couple of cups of coffee. I apologize for the speed at which this thing was delivered. But when you got a couple of cups of coffee and the information is going to be pouring out of you. Well, I appreciate you guys. As always, if you enjoy these, let me know. Comment, share, like, and subscribe. I appreciate y'all, and take care.